Welcome to Chapter 14, Social Emotional Development in Middle Adulthood. In this chapter, we will look at three major topics: personality theories and adult development. We'll look at a number of different theoretical approaches concerning middle adulthood years. The second section is stability and change, and then finally, close relationships. So in this first section on personality theories and development, we will look at stages of adulthood. Once again, we'll look at a few different theorists and what they had to say about middle adulthood years. We will look at the life events approach, and then also briefly touch on stress and personal control in midlife. So we'll begin with Erikson. Returning to our good friend Erik Erikson, we've looked at him a number of times. Remember, he has 8 lifespan stages, and in each there is a personal crisis to overcome in order to successfully navigate through that stage. Otherwise, there could be a negative outcome that gets added on to who you are and and your personality. In this 7th stage, he talks about the middle-aged adults between 40 and 60, and says that the major crisis is to achieve generativity. Otherwise, you will stagnate. Generativity means leaving something for the next generation, leaving something behind. So in middle adulthood, his idea was that you become aware that you have limited years left in life. You've probably passed your halfway point, and so you start to think about what will be around when you're finally gone. If you don't achieve a sense of generativity, that you're leaving something behind, Erikson says that you will stagnate. He also called this self-absorption. You turn inwards, into yourself, not thinking about others. This stagnation develops when individuals sense that they've done nothing for the next generation. Feeling like I've left nothing behind, or I've passed nothing on. Obviously, they're a very negative feeling to carry with you. Generativity, on the other hand, feeling like you're leaving something behind, can be achieved in a number of ways. You can see some of them listed here. Biological generativity just means that you've had offspring biologically, so you have helped to create life and passed your genes on. Parental generativity is that you've actually nurtured and guided and raised children. So you could have one without the other. You may be an adoptive parent with adopted children, or a step parent where you don't have biological generativity, but you feel like you've helped to raise children. So work generativity is developing skills that get passed down to others. Maybe you have a new technique in your field of in your particular career that you've passed on to others. And finally, cultural generativity means that you've created or renovated or preserved some aspect of culture that's ultimately going to survive you. Perhaps you helped to fund and to build a library in your community, for instance. Okay, and that's Erik Erikson. Generativity is particularly important in your middle adulthood years. And just speaking from one that is in that time frame, I would agree with Erikson, and generativity has become somewhat of an issue that I think about more and more. Just considering, what others will think of me, what kind of lasting contributions I've left behind. I really do believe that he kind of got this right, that this is when we start to think about those things. All right, the second theorist we'll look at is Levinson. He published a book called Seasons of a Man's Life. This is back in 1978, Seasons of a Man's Life. And he he did extensive interviews with 40 middle-aged men in order to come up with his theory and his book. So it was all middle-aged men that he dealt with, and so he only had experiences and data up until middle age, and from talking with these men, he developed this stage theory here. Um, Going from top from bottom up upwards. You have teenagers that transition into early adulthood, and it's a movement from dependence to independence, he says. Then in early adulthood, um, he said that your 20s are what he called a novice phase of adult development. You start to explore possibilities. You develop a stable life structure during these early adult years. By the time you move up to your 40s, you well actually before I get there, in your 30s, let me go back to 30s. Your 30s are a time for focusing on your family and your career development, and this is kind of what he says is essential to your life structure. He talks about life structures. So 20s, you're a novice. You're thinking about your life and your possibilities. In your 30s, you concentrate on your work, your family. You kind of build a structure. But then he says you go through a major transition, a middle adulthood transition, leading into your 40s, and at this point you have a stable career. Now you must look forward to the kind of life that you'll lead as a middle-aged adult. How's your life going to change? How's the structures of your life going to change? And so you're going to have things like the children moving on and the empty nest, eventually becoming a grandparent, and your work may change in certain ways. So anyway, so he kind of looked at that there are major transitions through life, a transition into early adulthood, a transition into middle adulthood, and then further transition into late adulthood, and that you develop a new life structure in each of these major time periods. That's kind of the overall focus of his theory. What's called Seasons of a Man's Life. This transition to your middle adulthood years, he said it lasts about 5 years, between 40 and 45 typically for the years, and you have to come to grip with these 4 major conflicts as you transition to a middle-aged adult. And once again, he only interviewed males. This is particular to male adult life, and so these were the major conflicts: being young versus being old. You have to realize that you're no longer young, and that you are aging, and you're heading towards being older. Being destructive versus being constructive, masculine versus feminine, attached to others versus separated from others. I don't want to get into all the details here, but these are the major conflicts he says that you face. And he, in particular, believed that this, because of these conflicts that you're facing, this is what leads to the midlife crisis. And he believed this transitional stage was a crisis stage. That's why he said that, it's really defined by these conflicts that you're changing in different ways as you enter middle adulthood years. So he believed that the midlife was a stage of crisis, and that this was normal. And this is what he found in most of his interviews with his subjects. In fact, 70 to 80% of his subjects found midlife transition to be tumultuous and physically painful, or not physically, sorry, psychologically painful. So tumultuous and psychologically painful were the words. And so 70 to 80%, 3/4 of his subjects, were saying that this was a major time of crisis in their lives. Okay, so he really, in his book, he really defined the midlife crisis, and it's really it was a major influence in that term becoming more popular. Once again, this book came out in 1978, and midlife crisis all of a sudden became more of a buzzword. And uh, so, how pervasive are midlife crises really? I mean, he found about 75%. Roughly 75% of his subjects described it as a time of crisis. Well, a different researcher by the name of Valent, and let me spell that for you. We're going to see his name later in the chapter, but Vaillant, Vaillant. He conducted what was called the Grant Study, which came out in 1977. So that book by Levinson came out in 78. This Grant Study had just come out in 1977. Very different view of the midlife crisis period. Valent described the 40s as a decade of reassessing and recording truth about adolescent and adult years. He said it's a time that you look back and reassess your life. You make sense of your past. And he also said that only a minority of adults would experience a midlife crisis. So we go from Levinson saying, approximately 75% of his subjects experienced this, to Valent, publishing right around the same time, saying only a minority experience a midlife crisis. So, which one is more accurate? Today's experts agree with Valent. The midlife crisis has been exaggerated. They believe that Levinson had exaggerated. His results were exaggerated. Perhaps his particular subjects experienced it more, but further research has really confirmed that it's really a minority. And I've seen figures that only approximately 5% of adults will experience something that could truly be called a midlife crisis. So maybe about 1 in 20 adults. Okay, so we had Erikson, we had Levinson, I briefly mentioned Valent. These both Erikson and Levinson's theories, just to go back quickly here, these are stage theories. Erikson has 8 stages throughout the lifespan. Levinson has a number of stages he mentions in his theory. Stage theories of adult development attempt to address universals of adult personality development, like what changes for everyone from one time period to another. But what they don't really do is address individual variations in adult development. Why does one adult, change differently than a second adult, or end up differently than another adult? So one of the shortcomings or criticisms of stage theories in adult development is that they don't really look at individual differences, and also they don't put enough importance on cultural variations. I mean, how adults change in one society will not necessarily be how they change in another culture or society. So I would say those are the two major criticisms. Not enough attention paid to individual variations, and not enough attention paid to cultural variations. One theory that kind of attempts to look more at individual variations is the life events approach. It attempts to help explain why one adult may experience tremendous change and another, very little or no change, and it would explain the differences between individuals based on what major life events each has experienced. So, in this life events approach, it is all about how major life events influence an individual's development. By major life events, we're looking at things like the death of a spouse, going through a divorce, and getting married, losing a job. These are considered major life events. And so the factors that are going to influence how and if you change are the life event itself, What's the actual major life event you've experienced? Mediating factors are individual factors like what is your current level of physical health? What kind of family supports do you have? Those will all obviously contribute to how you handle the life event. The individual's adaptation to the life event. The, what's your individual appraisal of the threat, for instance? For for some people, the same life event may be very scary. For others, it might not be uh, that important at all. So, how do you appraise the threat? What are your coping strategies? This is also part of your adaptation. The life stage context refers to what stage of life you're in. So, how you handle a life event threat in your early adult years would be different than in your late adult years. And then finally, the socio historical context. When does this life event happen? Historically, what year does it happen in? Okay, and based on all these different factors or variables, you know, we change in different ways. We can see all of these variables listed in picture, shown in picture form here. This is basically the model, the life events approach theory. And so you got on the left, you can see a list of life events. The mediating variables, once again, are the individual characteristics that are going to influence that. In the middle, moving towards the right, you see the appraisal of the threat, the coping strategies are going to influence it. And then, you know, the life stage context, how old are you, is going to constantly influence how much you change and if you change. The social historical context will also constantly influence this. And anyways, you put all this together and you get some kind of adult developmental change going on in response to a life event that kind of starts this whole process. So this is what the life events model looks like. Drawbacks, well, places too much emphasis on change is what people say. Doesn't really recognize that we often remain stable as adults. So research shows we don't always change in response to life events. Going back up here, I mean, um, having the birth of a child, yeah, you may change, you may not. Getting a new job, maybe yes, maybe no. Getting married, I mean, becoming a widow, I mean, it affects different people differently, and a lot of research shows that many, if not most adults, remain fairly stable throughout their adult years as far as the major personality characteristics. So, um, what researchers tend to say is that life events provide an opportunity for change, but it's not automatically going to cause a change. So, the starting life event, it gives you an opportunity to change developmentally, to change your personality if you wish. Many adults don't take up that opportunity. You don't have to. It's not forced upon you. It's not automatic. That it's a time where you may change if you choose to, and that's not really recorded, really shown in the model here. But a lot of people believe that's really a big part of what determines which adults change and which do not. Is your It's kind of your cognitive um, uh, inclination to want to change. Do you have a desire to change? And otherwise, you may not, no matter what major life events happen. Um, One other criticism is that maybe it's not major life events that are important. When we do look at adults that change their personality over time, maybe it's daily experiences or what's been known as daily hassles that are more important. Daily hassles are daily stressors, not major events, but just the grind that you may experience in various conditions of life. Magic having a boring but tense job that you have to endure year after year. It causes you stress. You don't really get a lot out of it. Cognitively, it's kind of boring overall, but you feel the stress of it because it has intensity, and and that's going to wear on you over the years. I mean, that could cause change. And once again, it's not a major life event. It's just the grind. Staying in an unsatisfying marriage may cause a change in a person. Once again, it's year after year of living through that. Living in poverty, for years. I mean, can cause changes in a person. So a lot of people believe it's the daily grind, the daily hassles that lead to more personality change rather than major life events. Oops. And then the last slide in this first section is um, I'm going to skip the first part of this slide here and just look at stress and gender. And there are two typical patterns that we see in how middle-aged adults handle stressful situations. Um, the fight or flight pattern is seen to be typical of males. You either become aggressive and kind of get angry at the stress in response to a stressful situation, try to tackle it right away, or you withdraw. You do the flight portion, and you socially withdraw, maybe drink alcohol, which is another form of withdrawal. And so research suggests that males are more likely to engage in this fight or flight pattern, either great aggression and attacking a problem or withdrawing from it. Whereas females, they say, tend to employ the tend and befriend pattern when they experience stress, which is seeking social alliances with others, turning to others for social support in handling a stressful event. Okay, so there are certainly people that believe that there are gender differences in adult life and how we handle stressful situations. And that concludes the first section of chapter 14.